Hello, and welcome to the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. We bring Bitcoin news, hot topics of conversation, and deep dives into a variety of Bitcoin topics to you weekly. We are Coinbits, a Bitcoin financial services company. Check us out at coinbits.app. This recording is for informational purposes only. No investment or legal or any other advice should be drawn from this content. And as always, consult an advisor before making any legal or financial decisions.
Glad to have you with us. All right, so today we have a very special episode of Bitcoin Roundup Live. We have a conversation with the Coinbits founders, Yousef and Maher. Thank you guys for taking the time. Thank you for you guys for joining us. And it's a very special time of the year for Coinbits because about this time 5 years ago, Coinbits was founded. And it started out with a very simple idea, and it's grown into a big company and one of the best on-ramps to get exposure to Bitcoin, to get some Bitcoin, to stack some sats. And so today we'll be talking to the founders and to some of the early team members on how the whole thing started. And it'll be an interesting conversation, lots of fun stories, lots of journey, hero's journey type stuff, and the struggle of being a Bitcoin founder as Bitcoin's volatility up and down, and dealing with clients who still don't, we're still learning what Bitcoin is, everybody is, and let alone people who may not be technologically savvy. And so lots of interesting anecdotes and stories of struggle and perseverance, and it'll be a really fun conversation. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about many of those topics. So excited to get this started here. But before we do that, let me give a quick intro to Coinbits. So we are a financial services company. Check us out, coinbits.app. We think we've nailed down the Bitcoin onboarding UX. If you want to get started with Bitcoin from absolute zero to owning some Bitcoin, you can do it in 10 minutes or less on coinbits.app. It's very user-friendly. It's an experience that you're used to with online banking, and it is going to be, I think, a really good way for a lot of people to get exposure to Bitcoin for the first time. Now, Bitcoin is a financial service company. However, information shared in this conversation is for informational purposes only. There's no legal or any other advice that should be drawn from this content. And as always, consult an advisor before making any legal or financial decisions. So, Yousef and Maher, thank you guys for joining us. And I'm excited to pick your brains on, reflecting here on 5 years of Coinbits, how times have evolved. Let me ask you first, how'd you guys first discover Bitcoin? Share your story.
Yousef, I think you're the one that should speak first on that.
Yeah. So Bitcoin. Okay. So you guys cut me off if my story, the context of my story is, I've run on a little bit here, but the actual story behind Bitcoin actually started like a long time ago. It started when I was, growing up in a household where both your parents are first generation immigrants, come from two different sort of places in the world that are, often deal with a lot of political, social, economic instability. You kind of grow up just like wondering in general, like how value is created and sort of how that wealth sort of transfers across the world and throughout history. And I've always had this fascination with economics. And believe it or not, before I became a software engineer, I actually was in finance. I had finance and engineering background. And so back in 2000, I'll start the story back in 2011 when I left college, where I went to work for a financial services firm, and, like most sort of college graduates within the 50 to 100 mile radius in New York City, you end up getting absorbed by the financial ecosystem. And so I was working on a project right after the 2008 financial crisis. The project, going into too much detail, was basically what we were essentially doing. We're trying to help banks essentially understand sort of the damage that was done with respect to the 2008 financial crisis. And, what we were basically doing was helping banks avoid high fines with respect to a lot of the sort of fraudulent and almost, I don't even want to say borderline. I would actually go so far as to say like illegal activity that was occurring back then. It just disgusted me, like just being on this project. And back in 2011, 2012, I was on this project, and I just, a part of me just made me want to, drop this sort of career path entirely and go to a different direction. And so that's kind of when I found technologies, the opportunity to help actually bring about a more just world and create better opportunity for more people who were hurting. And so that's what I did. I pivoted to software back in 2012. And then, towards the end of 2012, I think it was, or maybe early 2013, I don't exactly have the date pinpointed. I was caught up within the startup publications and reading up on, emerging tech trends and so forth. And one of the articles that I came across was this Economist article. And the Economist article, I think it was like right after a certain rise of Bitcoin's price, just over maybe 100 or so, or maybe even 200, and then coming back down to 100, or under 100 rather. And so I read this article. The article was certainly really fascinating. And then that article obviously led me to the white paper. And then going into the white paper, it's sort of, even though I was still early days in my software development education, it was, it almost the void, I think, that I've been thinking about my entire life. And it almost felt like a rude awakening, right? It felt as if this question that I had been thinking about my entire life had gone unanswered. And then all of a sudden, boom, I was just slapped in the face with an answer. And so in that moment, I immediately was scouring the internet trying to find, how do I acquire this thing, right? This Bitcoin thing. And so I remember vividly Coinbase being like still early days. They were actually one of the first, obviously the first crypto exchange, if not, or actually, no, they weren't the first one. Obviously MT Gox was before them, but they were the first sort of exchange through the right regulatory hurdles to ultimately get to widespread adoption. And I came across Coinbase, and I remember they had just been live for maybe a couple months or so. And I signed up, and I remember making my first purchase. And my first purchase was like 10 Bitcoin. And it was like 10 Bitcoin at like $100 or something like that. And ever since then, I have been evangelizing it, getting more and more people into it. Maher, around then, I also told Maher about this, told my family about this. Some people listened, some people didn't. I would often realize that the best way to get the fold was just to give them free Bitcoin, ultimately. And it was through that sort of those actions of just like giving away Bitcoin that more and more people inevitably became interested in what Bitcoin was. So I'll stop there. I mean, that's ultimately, I think that answers your question with respect to how I came across it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, when you were saying Bitcoin, the article saying Bitcoin's going to 100, my immediate first reaction was 100K, right? You're talking about 100K. But obviously back then it was just $100, which it seems like it's forever ago, but it really was only, 9-10 years ago, that, at most, or maybe a little longer. But it's crazy how times change. And I think, everybody goes through their own Bitcoin journey, and you found yours through your work. And that's really fascinating. So tell us how maybe you looped Maher into Bitcoin, and then Maher, maybe you could share kind of your experience on the listening side of things.
Well, I can tell you that he didn't send me any free Bitcoin, but it was around that time. I remember I actually ended up going back into my inbox, and I actually have an email from Yousef sharing that Economist article, like, hey, dude, check this out. Right around that time, I remember I had just lost a bunch of money in the stock market, and I had probably a few $1,000s left over. And so Yousef was just kind of talking my ear off. Like, he was really orange pilled back then, like, surprisingly, especially when there wasn't a lot of Bitcoiner content out there, right? I think that's what was pretty fascinating. I think visionary about how Yousef saw Bitcoin so early and how it really clicked. But for me, kind of like most people, I saw it as just like a speculative bet. I'm like, all right, fine. What have I got to lose, right? I'll just kind of throw whatever I've remaining crumbs left from the stock market into Bitcoin. That was also 2013 era, also on Coinbase. And I think for me, remember actually at the time we had just started our first company together, Yousef and I, and we had raised a bunch of money, and he was like, he was telling us right from the beginning, like, Maher, put some Bitcoin, put some money, put some coin. This was 2014 at the time, and I just completely dismissed it. I'm like, dude, we've got a company to build. Like, I'm not betting company funds that we just spent like a year trying to raise, on something speculative like Bitcoin. And so, I clearly eating my words now, read that wholeheartedly. And so I also vividly remember Yousef gifting Bitcoin to basically anyone who would just listen. Weddings, birthdays. Fast forward a couple of years later, when Bitcoin started to hit mainstream again, because it faded into the background between 2013, 14, and 2017. He was getting phone calls, texts, emails from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, Yousef, how are you, man? Like, by the way, where was that Bitcoin that you sent me? What was the name of that website? Referring to Coinbase at the time. But for me, aside from just like getting in speculatively right around the time when Yousef did, I actually rediscovered Bitcoin probably through a pretty unconventional path. Yousef mentioned our upbringing, and we're Muslim, Palestinian, and so that had a lot to do with growing up with a sense of skepticism of the mainstream media in many ways. And so even from a religious standpoint, I remember being in college just trying to understand and grapple this concept of Islamic finance, where usury and, interest-based dealings and, debt in general is prohibited, that with the current sort of, economic and monetary world that we all live in today, trying to like reconcile those worlds was just always an enigma, a thing that I couldn't really, something that I couldn't really reconcile for years. I remember specifically being in a finance class in college, specifically asking my professor, because they were teaching us about fractional reserve banking, saying, so the banks could just like take $100 and turn it into $1,000? Because at the time there was this, example of 10% reserves and, banks lend deposits, which is, a memory of what really happens today, right? And so when I asked them, like, so banks could just basically make money out of thin air, and I asked how come, he goes, literally the exact answer of this fiat professor, and I don't really blame him, was just, it just is. Like literally, that was literature. So, fell down the YouTube rabbit hole, truly started to understand like the ethics of money from a religious standpoint. And so that really primed me for Bitcoin. Then I found the gold bugs, the Ron Pauls and the Rand Pauls. And, I really, really embraced this philosophy of like hard money and sound money. And I remember 2016 when I really grokked Bitcoin. And I felt like because I was very familiar with technology, it was very easy for me to be like, holy crap, Bitcoin is just this gold, this, a better version of gold, but for the 21st century, right? And I think that was what allowed me to really build my conviction. And then so 2016, basically sold everything that I had, sold my car, sold my stocks, anything superfluous that I had. I remember my mom got me an Apple Watch a couple of years earlier. I had sold. I just really doubled down on Bitcoin and gold. Looking back, and I wish I didn't put that money in gold, but the idea was, I definitely doubled down on sound money, or at least from that perspective, right? So I still hold that gold. It's more of like it was bullion, at least it wasn't paper gold. But yeah, that's how I was, my backstory into getting orange pilled.
That's amazing. And, you guys are pretty close in age. You guys are brothers, yet you had two really different journeys into finding Bitcoin, which I think speaks a lot to kind of there is no substitute for doing your own proof of work and understanding Bitcoin on your own to really grok it, to use the words like that you used. That's also an inspirational story. And again, feels like forever ago, but it was only, it's only been, 6 or 7 years since you, according to you, grokked Bitcoin, which is awesome. Good to hear. So You guys now understand about Bitcoin, you hold Bitcoin. What was the motivation behind starting Coinbits? And of all the things that you could have been doing on Bitcoin, like what made you decide to go with a Bitcoin on-ramp as your first foray into Bitcoin building?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start this one actually, because there's a little more, I feel like ever since we discovered Bitcoin, Maher, I was always nudging Maher, even in our first startup, like, hey, like, if things don't work out here, maybe we should pivot to a Bitcoin startup, right? Like, obviously, get everything, like there's a whole process to that, but ultimately it was like this whole thing where I kept trying to nudge us in that direction. But I'll be honest, like we had no idea as to where, like what voids needed to be filled then. There was all these exchanges popping up, and it slowly started growing and growing in terms of, how many different startups were trying to serve not just at this point, not just the Bitcoin community, but slowly and eventually the wider crypto community. But yeah, we were like, I think for me, for personally, I went through this phase where I was just trying to experiment with a lot of different ways to self-custody. So at one point, I probably tried every way that you could think about with respect to self-custody. I even went so far as, especially early on and not knowing enough, getting an old laptop that wasn't used anymore, getting a USB with the Tails OS like on it, where you connect this USB and then you kind of boot, you boot the laptop against the US. So it's all in memory. And then you have your wallet in this like, in a very cold way. And it was like this whole process. Now, obviously today, I feel like there has gotten a lot better, obviously with the right, with the appropriate trade-offs. But I went through this process, this phase of just like experiencing all of the self-custody piece to it, the acquiring the Bitcoin, the spending the Bitcoin, maybe even on a dark net. I don't know. Maybe I remember buying some pizza with Bitcoin. I remember buying Red Bull with Bitcoin. So it was just like feeling it out as to what a Bitcoin, living on a Bitcoin standard could look like. And I guess I couldn't just pinpoint exact. I think it was also a timing thing too. Like back then, there weren't nearly as many people living on a Bitcoin standard, if any, at then. And so trying to figure out as to what point the right timing, or trying to time sort of the right opportunity for the right market, was also something that we were, I was before we finally decided to start Coinbits in 2017. And I'll let Maher actually talk about that, because really it was his seedling that we ultimately grew upon.
Yeah, Shep, I remember those days. I remember that Raspberry Pi that you bought that I ultimately took over and used as my own node later on, years later. Yeah, so this was, bring you guys back. This was 2017. We were basically winding down, probably spring 2017, we were winding down our first company. And that summer, we're trying to just figure out what to do, after building a startup for 4 years. And you don't want to rush right into the next thing. But I remember Bitcoin was starting to hit $1,000, $2,000, and it was starting to get a lot more attention, hitting mainstream. That summer, Coinbase was the place to really acquire Bitcoin, especially a place where we told friends and family to go. It happened that summer where I think it clicked for me, where, the timing obviously just kind of worked out with us wrapping up our last project. And, I can't stay idle for too long, for those of you that know me. But also, I felt a sense of responsibility, humbled by the fact that we got into Bitcoin really early, but specifically when Coinbase started to launch a ton of shit coins. So at the time, when we first started referring folks over to Coinbase, it was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. And at the time, it was, it's still fairly new. Okay, cool. We kind of wrapping your head around these ideas of crypto, et cetera. But you knew Bitcoin, you slept sound asleep, right? Knowing your money was in Bitcoin. And I don't know if but there was a term that was coined that summer, the Coinbase pump. For those of you guys that know the Jim Cramer thing, right? The Cramer pump, any stock that he talks about, that next morning, there's an immediate pop. It just became very casino-like. And I was this is not what I signed up for, not what I believed in years ago. Because I had also, similar to Yousef, bought on Coinbase originally. And so that summer was just kind of an eye-opening experience, just seeing this casino evolve and Coinbase sort of sell out to basically be the company they are today. And I remember it was September 2017. I was tinkering this really cool product, and I want to tip my hat to them. It was called Coin Flash. I don't know if it was a flash in the pan, no pun intended. These guys, I think they lasted for maybe a month or two. They had built actually a roundup concept, which I loved. I just loved how approachable and easy this concept was. And I'm man, I love this. I tried reaching out to the founder, tried to see if I can, collaborate somehow. The project didn't end up working out. And I'm hey, you know what? This inspired me to, want to continue or carry on the torch, so to speak. So that was the germ of the Coinbits idea. It was September 2017. And, again, hat tip to the Coin Flash guy. He was I think it was a one-man show. And, fast forward a couple of months, building up the idea, getting, recruiting a couple of people, Yousef, obviously, and, some other friends from our prior stint building other companies. And we launched our first pre-launch page. We sent the email out to friends and family. And we screenshotted that email to friends and family just, yesterday. I think we shared it. So yeah, that was the germ, man. It was this idea, this sense of responsibility that man, people are going to get hurt in this crypto casino that's, that Coinbase has turned into. And we need to do something about it. We need grandma to be on Bitcoin.
Amazing. I mean, I think the journey from where you started and then to pivoting to making, owning Bitcoin yourselves at that point in time in history of Bitcoin's development, and then to not only own it yourselves and put a significant amount of your net worth in it, but also to double down and turn your life's mission into a Bitcoin, to build a bit on top of Bitcoin and build the Bitcoin economy is really a testament for your foresight and knowing kind of what the end game was back then when Bitcoin was below $1,000 or just hitting $1,000. That's awesome. Now,
yeah. There's something also to mention here too. Prior to that, we had taken on, we were very familiar. We hadn't, having been maybe 5+ years in the tech space and the New York tech community and, building alongside venture-backed companies, et cetera. At the time, we started doing a little bit of angel investing. And so being aware of what boardroom conversations look like when you take on, outside money, people, back then I remember the culture in startup land was raising money from VCs was a milestone. And it was just something you celebrated. And I was yeah, actually to me, my perspective really shifted. And it's people don't realize that actually when you take on outside money, it's very much an obligation. And so I remember talking to the team at the time and right from the beginning, we also really wanted to build this Bitcoin company on our terms. what happened to Coinbase. And so, we wanted to really preserve this core ethos of what Bitcoin represented down to like the very DNA of this company. And so to this day, that's something that we really hold dear and we're really proud of, that, we're the people who dictate how this company is built, what we build, where we focus is the people who are actually building the company, not outsiders. And I think that's something that's really special that we've held on to these last 5 years.
I completely agree. I think that the idea that, what Bitcoin really represents is sovereignty. And, to build a Bitcoin product or company, and we're in this weird transitional phase, right, in the time of history as Bitcoin monetizes, where you're going to need fiat on-ramps, you're going to need fiat money to build any kind of product because people's bills are paid in fiat ultimately. And, it makes it challenging to not be able to, use your Bitcoin necessarily as your foundation. You have to kind of rely on kind of some, you need seed investments, you need to pay people to build the things that you want to build. And so we're in this weird time frame where it's going to be the case. And that's, not to blame anybody for taking fiat money and taking VC money, because it's needed, and it's in some ways the end justifies the means in that specific circumstance. But it makes it even more admirable of how you guys built Coinbits on top of Bitcoin with your own money, with your own, friends and family and whoever else participated in funding the organization to get it to 5 years. I mean, 5 years in startup world is a long time to be building anything. But kudos to you guys for being able to do that. Let me ask, so you built this organization, you built this company, you have now a functioning product, which we can get into how, some of the details and some of the pains in getting that up and going. But tell us a little bit about the temptation to get into altcoins. I think a lot of people, perhaps outside of the space, may not know like what happened behind the scenes between coin foundations and founders and the different altcoin armies and what kind of pressure they can apply, especially on an organization that didn't take any VC money, that didn't necessarily have, the most robust, fiat funding that there could be. What is the temptation like to dabble in altcoins?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I specifically remember the SHIB army reaching out to me specifically asking like, hey, Maher, if you add SHIB tomorrow, you'll have 100,000 new users. So those are some pretty vivid emails. And, as the fleeting, it was a very fleeting thought where you consider it, but it's like absolutely not. You sort of bring yourself back to like why you started this whole thing in the first place. But I will say like, in the beginning, especially to the 2018 era when like Ethereum was still kind of new and folks were like still kind of prodding and trying to understand it a little bit, there wasn't necessarily a motivation to add any other coins or anything like that. But I will say that the internal conversations that we had were purely about trying to not have any blind spots, right? And trying to just like understand the landscape and really just challenge our own assumptions. So it was more of like these intellectual, exercises, right? Thought experiments where, hey, let's just entertain this idea so that we may not be blindsided, or just build our conviction to our original strategy in the first place of being Bitcoin only. So we had a couple of those conversations and, internally, I remember Yousef and I kind of just, again, really from a thought exercise just to really challenge our own assumptions. Chef, do you remember anything else from those days?
I mean, I vividly remember writing the data model and calling it column field in our data, calling it crypto, like being able to specify the cryptocurrency as being used in the transaction. And, but again, I could proudly say I never, that always equated to BTC or in our case, XBT in our system. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, like how we try to build the company with this understanding that, we don't know what we don't know. And so we want to be kind of build it in a very extensible and abstract way, but at the same time, like being very careful about our conviction and, and making sure that we're not wavering and that all of it is built upon this solid foundation and principle. And yeah, it's great that we found ourselves in that process of just the myriad of like, because if anyone remembers 2017, it was like, when it came to the media and the content and just the dissonance, it was just like ICO token here, ICO token that. And it was just like this huge explosion of, false prophets, if you will. Right. And so, yeah, but those were definitely like intense conversations that we were certainly having early on with respect to how we thought about the mission. and how we thought about what we were trying to do and deliver. And yeah, I mean, there were other instances too where we've been approached by not just other cryptocurrencies communities, but also, people asking about, are we interested in rehypothecating and things like that? And we're like, no.
Right. I remember I specifically learned about how the Celsius and the BlockFis all worked when we had a market participant approach us with an opportunity to rehypothecate client funds. And so we asked, so who are you lending to? That really credible people. I'm like, oh, that's great. So what kind of collateral do they have to pull? It's an unsecured loan. And I was just like, what a joke. And so, yeah, we quickly, turned away those conversations. One other thing, by the way, on helping deter the quote unquote temptation was the fact that we were self-funded. We were bootstrapped. Like the revenue for the company was what was funding the expenses. And I say anything out of pocket. But was because we had to stay focused, right? So it was a blessing in disguise. I mean, thinking back, if we probably did have, the distraction of millions of dollars in the bank and we had the pressure of building up revenue, who knows, right? We may have succumbed, similar to the likes of the Casas of the world. You never know. And I don't mean to call them out specifically, but just the idea that this, we touched on earlier where, you have a board, people put money in your company, they expect a return. And so if you have a means to make money and you're not doing it based on ethical or moral reasons, that might be a tough sell in the boardroom for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I think the temptation is there. And it goes back to fiat mentality, fiat world and high time preference. That's sometimes what fiat forces. And, it's unfortunate. But hey, Yellow, you've had your hand up very patiently for a long time. It's not the 23rd of December, so I'm not sure why I'm giving microphone privileges, but let's see what you got to say here.
I just want to ask Yousef, how much you bench, dude?
Sorry, how much I bench? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
In my prime or today? After two kids?
Prime.
I think prime, I was probably putting up maybe 260 prime.
He's more of a deadlifter.
Yeah, but I have the broad shoulders, but don't let that trick you. I'm pretty flimsy.
Okay. Love the story, man. Guys, I love the story. Keep on.
Thank you.
260 is less than Yellow's weight. So you're going to have to keep on that, Yousef.
Yellow, I have a hope. I need a spotter, so you're more than welcome to join anytime.
I'm lazy.
260s, that's good.
Yeah, okay, son, with your creatine and your protein. Okay.
Thanks, Sean.
That was a nice commercial break. Let's get back on track here. So, you guys started Coinbits 2017. For those who are just joining, the conversation is being recorded so you can hear kind of the full story. But Coinbits essentially started in 2017, and five years since, we're still here. So that's something. Many companies that start in the Bitcoin space don't last that long, especially because of Bitcoin's price volatility. So maybe Maher and Yousef, you tell us a little bit about how difficult it is, or maybe how much effort it takes to navigate a business, navigate a company, especially with no VC money in the Bitcoin environment, especially with Bitcoin's price volatility, where you have these major swings up and down. And it's not just price volatility, but also user volatility. It's not a steady and slow and steady user growth. Maybe it is, but what is that like from a business perspective, from an IT and technology perspective, from hiring perspective? What does that look like?
Yeah, let me take this one and I'll let you add. You have to really have a knack for survivability, and what I mean by that is, I remember back in 2017. We probably went through 5 different bank accounts. No bank would want to bank us. When we tried to hire lawyers to help us draft our terms of use and privacy policy, all of a sudden, after 2017, every lawyer you meet all became blockchain lawyers. So you had to really sift through all the noise to truly find a team that actually understood your business, understood the technology that you were working with and the vendors that you were partnering up with. And we finally, probably 6 months into building Coinbits, we found a banking provider willing to work with us. And it took some really, really negotiation to get to favorable terms, especially at the time when you have little money and you're just starting up the business. And so I can tell you stories where we would go 6 months, not pay our bills, and you accumulate probably $50,000-$60,000 bill that you owe, where the company's collection department is finally saying hey, enough is enough. If you don't pay up, we have to close the service. You end up getting on the phone with the CEO, tell some sort of incredible story, fight for your life basically, and negotiate a $60,000 bill down to maybe $15,000 or $20,000, which then buys you some more time So when I tell you we really clawed our way, especially during the 2018-19 bear market, like there was really not much going on, especially, in terms of like new businesses coming up. It was really hard. And so that's really what it took for us to remain afloat, was just really fighting, negotiating really hard. And I remember something my mom always told me, that at least in business, there's no such thing as no. And so, even sign a contract and you do your best to run an honest business. Sometimes you just, there are months where you can't afford to pay your bills, and you got to dig deep, like really deep to figure out a way out of a hole or a scenario. And so I think it's that grit really allowed us to survive. Not to mention, at the time, I'll mention this in tandem, was that we started building a small Bitcoin mine out of New Jersey. And little by little, that slowly started accruing some Bitcoin that we could save. And effectively, we didn't realize it, but we were basically building a Bitcoin treasury for Coinbits. And so, fast forward to 2021, that ultimately paid off, because that's when we were able to actually hire a team. So that's how I remember those days.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're kind of underselling it a little bit. I feel like there were many sort of desperate moments where, after rejection after rejection with respect to bank, it almost felt like there were moments where we were like, was the world just telling us to quit ultimately? And at least for myself, I'm speaking for myself, and I'll say this: that Maher was just the amount of conviction and determination and persistence, and he was the stake in the ground. He was rock on the ground, and so I'll give him all the credit as to being able to really, to have been. I'll give him all the credit for having the strength to having us pull through during some of those bear markets and some of those really low points within the company's life cycle. It's also fair to say that in the pre 2019 or so, a lot, we were pretty, like, at least for myself, I don't want to speak for Maher, but I was also balancing life and kids, as you could all imagine, and then also not just getting married, a lot of life events around then, but also a lot of like even just other jobs I was contracting. A lot of my income was actually coming from elsewhere, right? So as you can imagine, when you're trying to bootstrap something into existence, or into a state where your full time and commitment is completely focused on it, those are just a lot of internal conflict questions that you're constantly asking. I mean, I have no shame in saying it. There were a lot of tears shed. There was a lot of arguing and back and forth, and equity being, infused into Coinbits to keep the dream alive. And it was tough. It was really tough. And I have no shame in saying that. But yeah, here we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And those are pretty personal items that you shared there. And I think that most people don't get to see the behind the scenes look, and it's really important for people to see. And like this is true in normal startup world as well. This isn't unique to Coinbits in any way. The difference is you don't have the mainstream media poo-pooing every single thing about your industry and about your entire reasons of existence, which is Bitcoin, along the way. And so trying to find partners is really hard as a startup. It's probably like 10 times as hard when you're working on something that most people don't even understand, or most people think is a scam, or is destroying the environment, or is a Ponzi scheme. So this is true now, let alone what it was like 5 years ago. So props to you guys for carrying it through. And I think of users, soon to be millions of users, are going to be thankful for all the work that you did to get Coinbits up and running. And we certainly appreciate it. So
yeah, I remember a specific story where it was like spring 2019, and we had a really awesome PR campaign that really put Coinbits on the map back in 2019, and we got a ton of press coverage, and it was great. Like, we saw a ton of usage. Yousef and I were actually pitching Coinbits at London Tech Week at the time, I remember. And all of a sudden, this Forbes article comes out about Coinbits, Market Watch, TechCrunch, a bunch, and we were running up on our banking limits. So we went from people were buying like $5,000, $10,000 a month in a coin, like on the platform, because it was still really early, right? Like just a handful of users, to tens of thousands of dollars. And our bank just wouldn't allow it. We were really running up on limits. And man, this might be really bad to say, but we were basically buying Bitcoin on behalf of customers on personal bank accounts. Like, it was really bad. So that lasted for like 2-3 weeks until we were, able to get our limits back up. And, we were able to that they were effectively loaning the company money, I had to call mom and dad, like, hey guys, can you lend us some money? Because we don't have these limits available to us right now. And so we obviously didn't want to deter our customers. And so, it was just some fun times when you have this like burst of growth and it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, the real theme here is that a lot of it, we were very reactive early on, right? Now we're in a position to be way more proactive and obviously get ahead of these things. But early you're bootstrapping this thing and it's, this little baby of a project is, it's slowly demanding more and more of your attention and your time. And, the best you could do is give it the time that, really like, you kind of give it all your time after all your personal stuff, all your, family stuff, all your, even like your work, and then you kind of give whatever's left of your energy into it. And as soon as it starts demanding more and more of it, you're kind of just like constantly reassessing, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? And not in a like mission driven way. Of course it's worth it, but it's more of like, am I the right person to lead this thing forward and to keep pushing on and begin shifting my priorities, or to making more and more sacrifices in other parts of my life, for this baby. So yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, you guys want behind the scenes. This is behind the scenes. This is what it takes to get a Bitcoin company up and running, especially early on days. So thank you guys for sharing all that information. Let me ask you, so you've been running this business for 5 years, and who knows what the next 5 years will bring, but in all of the things that you have experienced in those 5 years, tell us what is the most underappreciated, underreported, understood aspect of running a Bitcoin business from an engineering standpoint, business, product. What is it that talked enough about?
Yeah, I'll say one thing that comes to mind. When you're building a Bitcoin and you're hiring Bitcoiners, there's a trust factor with respect to the people that you're bringing into the fold that cannot be understated, especially when it comes to building a business in general, right? We try to remain as paranoid as possible, even with not just from external actors, but also internal actors. And so you're often building systems in place with layers of access controls and things like that to sort of like really, mitigate any kind of internal risk. Now, obviously that stuff is very good, especially when it comes to the finance side of the equation or the technical, like the database and all that stuff, obviously. But I'm just saying, just in terms of process, just being able to trust all the team members that we've managed to hire over the last year, really, and the amount of trust that you can have, knowing full well, even if you're not seeing the visibility on Slack or that they're very much pushing and working really hard to push the mission forward because we're a mission-driven company. I think like that can't be understated enough, to be honest.
Yeah, just to kind of second and build on what Yousef said, I think for me, the most underrated thing was how precious it is to be building alongside Bitcoiners. I remember, when we started thinking about recruiting and we started getting, building the team, I've never in any prior business basically made someone's, I guess, maybe belief system really be part of hiring criteria, right? And when I say belief system, I mean like their perspective on it. And at least in our case, right, guys, like as Bitcoiners, it was like, hey, you know what? Can you do the job? Are you competent? Is there merit in your contribution? But, that actually falls by the wayside, especially when you're building a Bitcoin company. I think we found that when the team comes together around a shared mission and vision, it just makes all the difference in the collaboration, the culture, the execution, the work itself, all around. I just think that, at least when it comes to growing the team, it's, very much we prioritize, right? And in many cases, try to only work with Bitcoiners when possible.
Absolutely amazing. I think the one thing about Bitcoin that is really hard to understand before you really go down the rabbit hole is the support of other Bitcoiners and being with other Bitcoiners all the time. And, if you go to, even if you don't work in Bitcoin and you go to any one of the conferences, Miami Coin Conference, like Block Boom, any one of the many conferences that exist now, Pacific Bitcoin, the feeling of just being with Bitcoiners for any extended amount of time, there's no second best, right? We need to meme that yellow. There's just something about being with people that you are so deeply connected with that, that there is no way to describe it other than you just have to experience it. And being in a Bitcoin company, you get to experience and live that every day. And that translates into so many things. Like we push each other harder. You are always like, there's no BS, right? There's no corporate nonsense. There's only the mission. There's only the goal. And the goal is hyper Bitcoinization. Whatever gets us there, that's what we're all driving towards. And so being a part of that, experiencing that is unlike any other. So, if you're here and you're on the fence about joining a Bitcoin business, highly recommend it, even if it's just on a volunteer basis, just to experience being with other Bitcoiners and being mission driven in a way that there is no fiat job that can even come close to doing. It's highly recommended. Yellow, you've had your hand up. What's up, man?
Yeah, I have a question, but before that, I want to point something that you just said. Like that feeling that Bitcoin companies, like small startups that start in this space, is like very special. Like it reminds me of like old school, like family run businesses like around like that kind of concept, like no bullshit, like straight away telling the truth. What has to be done, or the little like company, restaurant or whatever, like it's not going to like no bullshit, and like, but it has that like a kind of solidarity between the members, the few members that are running it. That always like close to my heart. But like my question was like, how did you guys met? Like maybe you said it before because I missed the start. How did you guys met and started?
Wait, me and Maher?
Yeah, the co-founder. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we met in our bedroom growing up together. We're brothers.
Oh, your brother. Okay.
Yeah, so Maher and I shared a bedroom growing up our entire life. It's funny, you're often told you get into business with family. I actually believe that's not that's like completely false. I think you should get into business with family. I think it actually provides for the opportunity, especially with two people who, if you're mission driven and your values are very shared, and obviously you have the ability to address sort of conflict amongst each other. And me and him have certainly years of conflict we've had to work through. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've not always gone along as brothers and had that sort of perhaps slightly competitiveness to us growing up because we're only a year apart. I mean, you're younger, but through it all, you end up busting through walls together. And I think once you get to that point, it's so amazing in that, even though we work together today, not in a bad way, but we're so busy that we oftentimes don't have the ability to communicate together every day. Right. And so there's a shared understanding, shared mission, shared mind share, constantly thinking, what the other one's thinking, obviously within our respective silos of our responsibilities as Maher as a CEO and me as a CTO. But I mean, I think more than having worked together since 2012, in the professional setting, we've certainly managed to grow way beyond that, we've certainly been able to get to a place where we can resolve our conflict directly without, with the right level of emotional intelligence and so forth. So yeah, I'm really proud to be able to call my co-founder my brother.
That's great. I'm going to meet you now as the Tate brothers. I just want to know who has the Bugatti.
I have a bicycle. Does that work?
True Bitcoin.
Oh, you guys are car guys. Don't even do that.
We're car guys. I'll give you that. Maher and I grew up loving BMWs. That was always our thing.
Great choice. My bike is a BMW.
You guys haven't seen Yellow's most recent "There's No Second Best" meme. It's of a BMW. It's funny. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's hilarious. But bring it up. Pin it at the top. BMWs are shitcoins for everybody listening. You should buy Bitcoin. This is a Bitcoin space here. As are thinking.
I did sell my BMW to buy Bitcoin, so I agree with that.
But then you bought another BMW. Let's be honest.
Listen, everybody's allowed to have some high time preference things. Just choose your high time preference things wisely. All right, so let's pivot the conversation a little. So you've talked about your journey. You've talked about the challenges of building a Bitcoin business. You've talked about the family aspects of this, the grinding aspects of this. What would you say is the scariest moment of your journey so far in building Coinbits?
Oh, that's a good one.
Did you at any point fear that everything, that perhaps Bitcoin, maybe you had some doubts on Bitcoin after the fact, after starting Coinbits? Did you have any regulatory fears? Did you have any security fears being kind of, founders of we're not public in the IPO sense, but where it's a public organization and people could see who you are and they can figure out who you are. And, have you ever feared for your security as a Bitcoin founder?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. The reason I took a pause to just think about that was because there were many fears, right? Like kind of, years. And I think that probably, one, if I may, speak maybe a bit more vulnerably, was that, when you think about what we're doing, I guess I won't mince words, but we're separating money from the state. And something I always struggled with was just how public to be, because, do you basically, do you put a target on your back in many ways, right? And especially because you're a small team, you're a one-man show or two people trying to build a company, you don't have the backing of, millions of dollars. It puts you in a pretty vulnerable position to just think about what we're doing and, our silent revolution, or our peaceful revolution, as Saif loves to call it. And I completely agree with it. I think personally, that's something that I've always, thought about. And honestly, it wasn't until we started to grow the team where you start to build the confidence in yourself and what you're doing to be more vocal, more public, because, you're not just there by yourself anymore, right? You've got Bitcoiners, you've got people who believe in you, you've got your team behind you that's backing you and supporting you. And, it comes in really subtle ways, man. It's like little DMs, text messages like, hey, Maher, thanks for this, or great job, or hey, thanks for saying this. But also, I also want to chalk it up to my role models in the space. And someone who I really look up to a lot is Saif Amoos, as you guys all know. I think he's a master at the work that he does, and inspires me every day and gives me the confidence to keep doing what I'm doing and, not to be afraid.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Can you just say that question again for me? I want to make sure.
No problem. The question was, what was the scariest moment so far? Who knows what the next 5 years brings? To Maher's point about separating money from state. Scariest moment of building Coinbits that you've had so far?
That is a great question. I wish I actually.
You benched 260 pounds, so maybe.
No. I used to bench. You got to be very accurate with that statement. I bench maybe 260 grams now. So I was thinking. So, but actually, after a second, what Maher said, I do think it's funny. I think the scariest part, believe it or not, is really your own growth, right? With every decision that you make, there's consequence. With every person that you hire, there's consequence. With every, just along the ways, you're constantly just making these decisions. And oftentimes the more specific, scary part of it all, I think, is, at least for me, is often trying to be more and more okay with having a light being shown to you, because, realistically, nobody can grow an organization to a certain level of influence and success without being in some kind of light. And oftentimes, you just kind of have to start slowly taking those steps. And I think for the most part, I've always been comfortable, similar to Maher, just kind of being, in the background, right? But realizing that, if you have something to say and, somebody wants to hear it, you let the market decide as to whether or not what is valuable or not. And so as we build Coinbits and we scale Coinbits and we communicate our mission, our values, our principles, etc., it's a very important place to be, so that you can try to attract the right kind of people, the right customers, the right employees. I mean, now more than ever since, Roesi, you've done a phenomenal job to build the Coinbits brand publicly. There's a lot of self-filtering with respect to recruitment even today. There's a lot of people just, constantly being like, hey, I want to come work for you guys because of, basically because of your presence, because of the vibe you put out, because of the things you say. I can really come to vibing with what you're saying. I'm aligned with what you're saying and what you're building and what you're doing and how you think about things. But yeah, I mean, you kind of got to, at the same time, to Maher's point, it is a bit of a war that we're fighting here. And, and it's not that we want anyone to get hurt along the way necessarily. We want everyone to just slowly come to see the world the way we see the world as Bitcoiners, and we're trying our best to help people see that. And oftentimes you're going to have people with different agendas who, will see you as a threat, that may have more control than you or more power than you to silence you, especially these days. And so it's really important that you're very strategic in your approach as well.
Definitely. And I think this might be a hot take, but I think scarier moments in being a Bitcoin company are not behind, they're ahead of us. As crazy as some of the stories, not having enough money or not having enough banking limits to buy all the Bitcoin that you can for your customers, as crazy and as insane as that might have been, I think, unfortunately, it's going to get scarier. But hey, that's what we're here for. We're here to separate money from state, as you guys said. And it's not an easy road, the road that needs to be taken.
Yeah, really, just to round that topic up, it was never about like money, right? People ask, like, is it scary to like, oh, you put all this money into Coinbits? Like, absolutely not. Money's something that follows, it never leads. It's the ideas, it's the people, it's the creativity, right, that really drive, and money follows that. So, I just, maybe some parting advice to the audience here is never worship money. If money's a tool, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, and if you're investing in something that you like really believe in, it's not wasted, right? It's something that you learn from, you experienced, and you gain from it.
Absolutely. Definitely. Now, we talked about scary moments, we talked about hard moments. Let's talk about funny moments. What was the funniest interaction or funniest maybe customer story, without doxing people, that you have encountered in 5 years of Coinbits so far?
I got to think about this one.
Boy, all my trauma trumps those funny moments. I have to also think about them too. Let me think about that.
Was there maybe a situation where you guys talk about how the goal of Coinbits was to get grandma on Coinbits? Do your grandparents? I'm not sure if they're still with us.
Yep. So actually, I'm proud to say Grandma is definitely on Coinbits, and she's definitely a whole coiner at this point. So proud of her.
What was that onboarding like? Were you a good grandchild and you just did it all for her, and she basically trusted you with it, or was it walk her through?
I know, absolutely, man. No, yeah, orange pilling Grandma was easy. A lot of it, definitely. As you guys know, as trust the size Bitcoin is, it's only going to grow through trust, right? I think we talk about this a lot at the company, and so yeah, she definitely trusted her grandson to stack alongside her, so it was easy.
Any other stories like that where, perhaps you was unfamiliar with even online banking? Right? I'm thinking about my parents, and definitely a generation older. Online banking is like, as long as it's been around, it's still kind of a scary experience for a lot of people who are not maybe internet natives. Any fun stories of people trying to get onboarded that just couldn't do it or didn't understand or wanted to buy and they hit sell or something like that?
One thing you come across building a Bitcoin company is a lot of fraud, right? So we obviously, I got to be careful with what I share, just because, just to not dox anyone, like you said. But there apparently, I remember there was somebody who reached out to us because they got, I think they had been identified as a fraudster, and they were trying to pull some money out, that from, by the way, I think it was like their legitimate bank account. Maybe they, they tried to, again, the details are a bit fuzzy, but I remember when we did a Google search on this person was, like a convicted felon, if I'm not mistaken, Yousef. And I think he like fled America to another country. So I remember like that sort of causing a little bit of a commotion when we found out that there's some really shady people out there that try to scam you. And I remember that story was a little funny when the poor guy couldn't, like, I think he might have legitimately bought his Bitcoin, but the bank had like, frozen his account on our end because he was a known fraudster and like a convicted felon for something. But yeah, I remember that was like a really weird story, and he had to like flee the country to like not get caught or something like that.
I mean, I feel like there's got to be funnier stories. I might not be the best person to remember them. I mean, I remember that vividly, but I mean, I don't know if I necessarily kind of know some of the funnier stories that we have. But I know we have some team members on the call, so if anyone, please feel free. Like, if you have a funny story that either of us are forgetting, like, please feel free to interject and bring that up. But yeah, a lot of it wasn't funny, so a lot of the experience wasn't funny. But there's always like those moments like that here and there, where, in the case of frauds, it is funny when you can, I guess, catch them before the act. And so you're kind of like seeing in real time them trying to like exploit your system. And that's always interesting. But I don't know. Funny is probably not the right word necessarily.
Laughing at fraudsters getting caught is funny.
Fair enough.
If you guys think of something, share it. It'll be funny to maybe we make a tweet storm about it later. That would be a cool Twitter thread. All right. Instead of funny, let's go back to Bitcoin for a second. So you guys have been in Bitcoin for 10 or 6+ years, depending on where you start to count from. How has your personal understanding and appreciation of Bitcoin evolve as the years have gone by, as you've been in the Coinbits, Bitcoin's business, building Coinbits? How has that changed as you personally grew, as the company grew, as Bitcoin grew? Was the mission did you see separation of money and state from the start? Like, is that something that you immediately grokked and was just that's always been it? Or is that understanding of Bitcoin been something that you evolved with over the years?
I'll say this: I've always felt that. I've always known that from the start. Like I said, it's kind of given sort of the background, the context coming into my discovery of Bitcoin with respect to, my father being Palestinian, my mother being Ecuadorian, and coming from two places that are often have these political or social instability and so forth. And just like really I guess getting to a point where like at a macro level, at a very abstract level, like understanding money and its role in our relationships with one another, both not just at the individual level, but obviously at the national level. So you come to like very quickly understand what fiat is and how it works and how it can suppress progress in many parts of the world. And for me, it was always that, like from day one. It was just always interesting to observe as the monster grew. And I use the word monster in a good way right here with respect to Bitcoin. As the monster grew and its influence and it being seen as a threat with respect to the legacy system.
Yeah, at least for me, I think very quickly you get past the appeal of number go up and you realize that even if Bitcoin stayed at its current price today, it's the most beautiful thing or one of the most beautiful things humanity's ever invented. It's really, to me, the permissionless aspect of Bitcoin. And when people say, Bitcoin is fuck you money, what they need to understand that it's not about getting rich. It's about the fact that you don't need to ask anybody's permission to use it. That's what's fuck you about it. And so that's what I've really learned to really appreciate about Bitcoin, like on my own, and the freedom it provides and the sovereignty it enables. I also want to credit, though, at least in terms of like how I see Bitcoin, Safe, John Vallis, for those of you guys that know, and even Breedlove, where they started to like really help me understand how Bitcoin can also like change you and change us as individuals and like us as people. And I think that, a lot of the work that those guys are doing really helped evolve my thinking of Bitcoin beyond it being just like, money and a tool for trade or permissionless money or quote unquote fuck you money, but actually how it can change people, right? How it really help. It has this like psychological effect on you over the long run. And I think that's absolutely beautiful.
Hey guys, just taking over here for Oasis. That was an awesome answer. And I just wanted to backtrack real quick. I had what I personally considered, I guess, a funny moment that I think maybe a lot of us in Bitcoin experience, but maybe if you knew my father-in-law, maybe it'd be funnier to you. But ever since this FTX thing blew up, I've gotten 3 separate text messages from my father-in-law asking me if I was involved in FTX and, I guess concerned about his daughter, obviously, and our financial standing and all that. But trust me enough, obviously. But after the 3rd text, I said that we are the anti-FTX. We constantly warn against this. Like, trust me, these are the people we warn people about. I have absolutely no involvement in them. I never would. And he's from Bayonne, New Jersey, and his like Bayonne accent. He goes, okay, good. I just want to make sure I don't have to go down to the Bahamas and teach these guys a lesson. And it's just like a funny, I think we all experience that to a degree in Bitcoin where, there's this conflation of Bitcoin and crypto, and something like this happens, we kind of have to defend ourselves, even though we were kind of, waving the warning flag the whole time. But I'm sure other people have experiences like that. But that's just that's one of my experiences being known as working in Bitcoin and working for Coinbits and everything. Getting back on track though with Maher and Yousef. Next question for you guys. Knowing what you know now, 5 years in, what would you do differently? Whether it's from a business standpoint or whether it's from a product standpoint, was there anything that you guys would change in retrospect? And then, after that, I think we'll get into the future, but just knowing what you know now changed in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to say, so one of the things we've done recently in the last 6 months, having grown the team and made, this 2.0 release that we just released 2 weeks ago, like a priority, we over the last 6 months, we actually spent a lot of time on the team feature freezing. Well, maybe not feature freezing, but rather feature freezing 1.0. And what we did over the last 6 months, we actually rewrote every single line of code in our system. We re-released with the 2.0. I'm sure if you haven't seen it yet, you'll love it. The designs, everything was amazing. It was like a whole team effort over the last year or last 6 months, plus, a few months in preparation to get this release out. Now, I made an executive decision early on to cut technical debt down to zero or minimize it as low as possible. And that's why we kind of had this 6 month long long push. And I guess I would say like the one thing I probably have done differently, kind of looking back, is probably done this earlier on. I think, especially when you're building a business, you're trying to create value and you're oftentimes pushing to create new features. But oftentimes, you have to keep the house clean. And so, the only way that you can, to deliver a new feature effectively and efficiently going into the future, you would want to make sure that all your tools and everything you need is ready to go. And so one of the things I think I would have done a little differently was probably, started cleaning the house a lot earlier. But, it's a minor sort of, retrospective here. I wouldn't think, in general, I wouldn't have changed much else. I mean, sure, I can say, we could say the obvious things like buy more Bitcoin or build the team faster, sooner, right? Things like that. But at the end of the day, I think we're alive where a lot of companies aren't. And, a lot of those decisions along the way, even if there were certain trade-offs earlier on, I think we're just lucky to say that we're alive and surviving and growing. And so not a lot of regret there.
Yeah, and I would say my 2 cents on that is I wish I would have learned to hire for the mission, not the skill, a lot sooner. I think would have made all the difference. And yeah, I think obviously we really embrace that today. And for those on the call, Coinbits is hiring, Coinbits is growing. And, please, if you guys are interested, check out the product. If you haven't got a chance to already, we can confidently say we're probably the best on-ramp to Bit. The user experience will be incredible. The customer service, you guys will really enjoy the experience. Check it out if you haven't already got a chance to.
David's going to come up and ask a question right after this, actually. But Maher, I want to press you on one thing right there real quick, if you don't mind. You said hired for the mission, not the skill, is one of the big things that you've learned. Can you just expand on that a little bit? Because I find that really interesting. I think it's very pertinent to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think we touched on it a bit earlier, where I think that, when you're building a company and you have so much stake in something, right? You want the person next to you to share that similar stake in what you're building. And I don't mean the company necessarily itself. I mean like building on Bitcoin, right? Furthering the mission of Bitcoin, like bringing Bitcoin to the world. And so, when you're in the trenches, when you're sacrificing, when you're giving up time with your family and, or money or, et cetera, the people you want alongside you to be basically like you, to sacrifice alongside you, because it's lonely. It's lonely building. And I think when you hire people who are there for the reasons, that share the same why as you, it's not lonely anymore.
That was really great, Maher. And I guess kind of observing, what you just said and kind of observing your leadership it's really crystallized for me that skills can be taught, but values are much harder to kind of build, and that makes them so much more important. And I just wanted to say that kind of, you had said that what we're doing with Bitcoin is a peaceful war, but I do want to say that working for you and Yousef, it's like, working for two very kind and gentle William Wallaces from Braveheart in terms of the level of inspiration.
David, can I just interject for a second?
Yeah.
Working
okay,
with.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate that. And then my main question though was kind of to open it up to the rest of the team, because we've got some other team members on this call, Frida, George, Dave, Juan, and I kind of wanted to ask, just because working for a Bitcoin only company, went to previous roles.
I think David, did you cut out?
Oh,
Yeah, David, I think it's you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you were saying working for a Bitcoin company, and then I think you cut out.
Okay, my apologies. I was just touching on the opening it up to the team to really share their experience working at a company, how that has really changed how they view work and life. And because I think that our team and other Bitcoin companies are probably similar. We all come from such different backgrounds work-wise, and I think it would be really cool to hear from the different members of the team on this space and to kind of share their perspective.
That's great. Yeah. Anyone on the Coinbits team, please feel free to jump in. Any hands, Joe?
I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, but I could start.
I
have one right here, actually. George wants to come up. George, why don't you go, and then I'll go after you.
And George is the MVP.
Yeah.
Just letting everybody on this call know.
George, feel free to go ahead. Everyone's excited to hear from you right now.
Yeah, hey guys, how's everyone doing? Yeah, I appreciate the opening up the floor to some of the rest of the team members. So, just to answer your question, David. So, just to give a little bit more background about like the work I've done in the past. So, I never really had a clear career path. I'm still pretty fairly young, I would say. I'm 26 years old, but never really had a clear career path. Just a bunch of like different jobs, really. Like, you can name it. I've done, from customer service to working, with my hands and fixing rims and like, labor work. I mean, I've done it pretty much all, I would say, or at least a good chunk of a lot of different types of work. And I will say that, when I started working with Maher and Yousef and Coinbits, it's definitely not like any other job, especially, working in Bitcoin as well. One of the key things that I can say is that I actually enjoy what I'm doing and I enjoy my job, even though it actually doesn't really feel like a job. It just feels like just any other day, right? Like some of the guys are up late at night. Some of the guys are on the weekends, right? It's not really a 9 to 5 in most cases. And you don't really see that out in the typical, work world. So that, that's definitely one key difference that I've noticed is that, I enjoy it and I don't really find it like, oh, I have to get up and go work, right? It's like, yes, I have to go build. The other thing too is like working with these guys, I've definitely learned a lot of valuable lessons, not only like within my professional like work career, but also in life. Like I've learned a lot of life lessons. And I feel like, of course, Bitcoin plays a huge part of that. It like teaches you a lot. But, these guys are definitely my like first orange pilling, like people, if you will. And I've learned a lot and you really don't learn those kind of valuable lessons throughout life, in other jobs. And I mean, you can, and, there are. But yeah, I feel like those are like two things that I would say, when you ask about how is working at Coinbits or working at a Bitcoin company different than like any other previous jobs that we've had. Those are like two really things that stick out to me.
That was awesome. So Frida is actually going to come up next to follow George and give us a little bit about her experience working at Coinbits and a Bitcoin first company. I think we're still connecting though. Maybe having some spaces issues.
I can do some elevator music if you want.
Sorry, Yellow, can you say that again?
I can do some elevator music until we wait.
No, that's all right. I'll go in the meantime. For me, with working for Coinbits and working for a Bitcoin company, I'll give, I guess, an experience kind of outside of Coinbits that kind of embodies what it's like working for Coinbits. We went to the Bitcoin conference a couple of years ago. We went the last 2 years. And the first year that we went to Safe Dean's dinner. And it was the Coin Standard Carnivore dinner. And we all just kind of decided to kind of split up and network and talk to other Bitcoiners, see how it goes. And I went with my brother and we went to a table with probably 6 or 7 other people that, we've never met before. And, I had probably like the best conversation that I had in years at that table with a bunch of people that I didn't know at all. My brother, who, wasn't really a Bitcoiner at the time, was interested in it, but didn't really know much. And you just kind of sat with these people and shared the same values, so to speak, and just learn from them. They learned from you. Like you just engaged, and it was just like 3 hours of dinner went by like nothing with absolute strangers. And I think that's what working at a Bitcoin company is. You're around people who are like you and not like you at the same time. It's like you kind of align on the most important things, and then the other stuff, you kind of it's just like expanding your horizon. You just learn so much from other people about, their lives, but you kind of like foundational, you're all aligned. And, not to get too cliche here, but there's something about just like Bitcoin. And, it's one thing to work for something that you're passionate about or work in something that you're passionate about. And then what I've found, because I've worked in a few different spaces. I've worked in accounting. I've worked with family, with my dad. I've worked building my own business in sports and sports betting realm. And, that was something that I was really passionate about. But Bitcoin kind of adds another layer to that, which I define as mission. And that kind of takes another, like that just gets that much more out of you. When you align with like passion and mission, it's like thinking about going back to public accounting right now is I don't even know a word to describe it. Like, it's just inconceivable. So when you're, that's how I would describe working in Bitcoin, working at Coinbits. There's just levels to that kind of thing, finding your passion, finding mission, and it's a game changer. And I think like what George was saying about the weekends or nights or, whatever, it's just kind of all blurs together because it's kind of the anti 9 to 5. But from there, I will hand it to Frida, and let's get some of your takes, Frida, some of your experiences.
Hey guys. Yeah, sorry I was there, but I wasn't there earlier. I have a sick baby right now that I'm carrying too. So, I came from a background of like a lot of startups at the very start of my career. And I was really into, the energy that startups provide. And, that was before I had kids and, kind of could do crazy hours and all-nighters and stuff like that. And I was hesitant for the longest time to actually come into the Bitcoin space, even though I was a Bitcoiner, because I 100% thought that, Bitcoin is so young that I must be finding myself in another complete startup environment. And I would have to pull super crazy hours in order to, get this thing called Bitcoin out in the world. And, just interview and then coming and meeting Coinbits guys, it was just really cool to see that the thing that initially got me into the Bitcoin community was really the family values and the idea that we want to, bring our kids a bit. And I really want to say that Coinbits embodies that for me, that, I currently work at this company and I really love the way that we set family first. We'll have meetings with all of our kids on our laps once in a while, not by choice necessarily, but, because the kids are around and we work from home. And it is something that is really like truly a family environment. And I don't just say that to bullshit. There's a lot of the times where like I've come, in my career, have worked for corporate America and then it's like, oh yeah, home work-life balance is so important. But it never really turns out that way. I feel being in the Bitcoin space in general, it's just like such a passion project that it's like, I personally, I wake up every day and I do what I love. And I can truly say that. It's not just like a spiel, And I really was hesitant, like I said, to come into the Bitcoin space and work for it because I thought it was crazy fast paced, which it is in a way. But because it's a passion, deal for me, comes very easy. And then the other thing was that I just, really wanted to work on something that, brings Bitcoin to every household. And I feel like we are on a really cool path of doing that. Yeah, if I put it into relation, like even if I work for people, I talk to people like friends of mine that say they have their dream job in the fiat world. A lot of the times when I really listen in, it's really not. I feel like Coinbase kind of feels like I'm running my own company, even though it's not my company, clearly. But it does feel that way, because it's just like coin as a whole and bringing that to folks is just such a cool thing to work on. And I feel like we're so early, we're so young, and we're not young in the sense of our company is not, we're actually pretty old, but when it comes into the space, we are so young. And so it really is very energizing in the way that I was hoping it would be from like a startup environment without the crazy startup hours. But then again, we do get to work on our passion stuff. So like we just had a release the other night and like a week or two ago with our new updates, and we all wanted to be there, and I would check up at like 2 a.m, waking up in the middle of the night, just like checking in, making sure, our release was going well. And so I kind of get all the bits of what I used to love about startups without all the weight of it. And so, yeah, it's a really requirement. I really love it. I wouldn't choose anything else. And I would say that I'm truly aligned in like my life right now being with Coinbits. So I don't know if every other Bitcoin company works this way, but I can tell you that Coinbits is definitely welcoming. And also to point out, we're all over the world. And so it's pretty cool to have like team members that, I just check in within my morning, like I'm on the West Coast, and then we have some people that are sitting in Portugal. And, so we are really great collaborators, the way that we work through our online calls and things like that. So sorry, Maher who raised his hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to let the group know that Frida is German. And so when she says she's not a bullshitter, she means it.
Very true. Yes. Yeah. And like all I can say is, like I've worked in the past for very corporate jobs, like some of my last jobs being very corporate and very big companies. And, it's like I have so many skills under my belt. It's really cool to apply that to just a project that we all love. And one thing that I can also say is it's a little different. And I kind of had to retrain myself coming in here. In my private life, I was used to the Bitcoin space and how really everybody has a say and has a word, and like kind of hierarchies don't matter as much. And in the corporate world, as much as people try to do that, or as in the fiat world, I should say, as much as people try to do that, there's still like a little sense of hierarchy when you walk into a room here or there. That doesn't really happen here. Like anybody that comes in, if you have a day in our company and you have a great idea, like you want to be heard. And then, it's just, we collaborate very frequently. I was taught from a corporate background to never waste anybody's time in meetings. And so sometimes it doesn't allow for great cooperation, I found. So here we have a lot more meetings, and sometimes we have even like, I guess what you would say, water cooler talks or whatever. We would just sit on Slack for like an hour and talk about nothing, but then out of the nothing comes something really cool. And so I really love that, so that there's no isolation, even like working remote from my home office. Like I don't feel isolated. And I hear a lot of people in the fiat jobs talk about, working from home is isolation. And that's definitely not true in this field.
Yeah, Frida, I completely agree. And one thing that kind of has stuck out to me from what you just said is how self-actualizing working in the Bitcoin space is. No matter where you are within a company, kind of what you're doing, it's really self-actualizing.
Yeah, I also love the quick thing you mentioned about kids and, kids on laps in certain meetings when the time calls for it and there's no other option. And, because one's thinking about their kids when they're thinking about Bitcoin, right? It's a very low time preference. How are we going to fix the future? What are we actually doing this all for? And that's what it's all for. It's for the future. It's for, a bunch of people who see what's wrong with the world and what's gone wrong for the last X number of years and how we're going to fix it. And we've all kind of, individually come to this conclusion that Bitcoin plays a huge role in that. So I love it. Getting on to the final question for Maher and Yousef. We want to look forward here. So we talked about the last 5 years. What excites you about the next 5 years of building Coinbits? Is there anything that you want to share with the audience on what to expect in the future, in the near future, in the extended future? What does Coinbits look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Yeah, we'd love to know.
Yeah, maybe before putting in my 2 cents, I would love to hear from Dave, our director of product, if he's on with us, about what the next 5 years look like. I think he is the best person to communicate that.
Sure. Hey guys, I'm here. Yeah, before I get into that, just really briefly on the previous topic about actualizing, when you're building a business and you're managing and you're trying to build like a sense of leadership in a company, there's always this attempt to, tie people's individual work to a broader mission that matters. And meaning is really important for people's productivity and their well-being at work, and having work have meaning. And you can do that in many different ways. There's lots of different ways to make your work have meaning in this world. But what is so great about leading in a Bitcoin company is that it's so built in. You guys have already talked about how the passion just comes built in. You have to hire for the passion and hire for the mission. It's a blessing that is really rare. Like there's really not very many other things, like maybe, medical care, certain types of medical care, certain types of charity work, where you get this sense of, I'm making a difference both at the small scale individually with the people I interact with, and I'm doing something greater it's a part of a greater story of progress. And all that to say, if you're considering, it doesn't have to be Coinbits, but if you're passionate and you think that this is maybe something that you couldn't be, you wouldn't really be happy doing anything else, you really want to get into Bitcoin, I would just say, take the leap, take the plunge, say Geronimo, say goodbye to fiat, to, your fiat expectations and the expectations of you, and create your own reality, because we need everybody who feels that way. We need everybody's help who feels that way to get into the space, because, when we talk about the inevitability of Bitcoin, on some level that's true, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen on its own. It's going to happen because people like you and me and everyone on this call is investing in it. So, and investing in terms of time and energy. So definitely take that plunge. And as far as the next 5 years, well, Coinbits is an interesting company because we build for a hyper Bitcoinized future, but we have to straddle the present because we are building a layer of financial services that are built on trust and on the Bitcoin network. And so our philosophy is to give people access to Bitcoin and preserve those values. So it's not just access to Bitcoin on paper, access to exposure to Bitcoin's price. It's access to Bitcoin's quality, make it a powerful technology. Self custody, quick payments, quick settlement, all those types of things, and bringing that and making it user friendly, while at the same time ensuring that the entire platform is backward compatible with fiat. And there are a couple of ways that we do that. One is on the technology side. So we build technology that interfaces with legacy fiat rails. And if we didn't have to do that, our jobs would be a lot easier. It's actually quite difficult and annoying to have to integrate, the previously existing paradigms and technologies for fiat with a Bitcoin. But we do it because that's the way that we're going to create more Bitcoiners and give access to this technology. And then the second way that we do it is through product design and kind of finding the right interactions, the right metaphor, that people have Bitcoin experiences that feel familiar and intuitive. Bitcoin is a new technology. It's a breakthrough technology. And so there is a certain amount of relearning that everybody has to do. But if you flood people with the need to relearn, they shut down. They think it's not for them. One of the guiding principles we always ask ourselves is, are we designing this so that a customer or a member will use it and say, Bitcoin is for me? Oh, I didn't think Bitcoin was for me, but it is. Look at how it's easy to use. Look at how it works quickly and efficiently and intuitively. And so finding the right amount of, or finding the right kind of metaphors to import from legacy terminology that people are used to, while at the same time being clear about how this is a new technology. It's a really interesting product design challenge. And as we go forward, it's possible that as Bitcoin becomes more widely adopted, what we hope to do is spend more time building out Bitcoin technologies and less time building out fiat technologies. It's really just about the needs of our members, but we anticipate happening. And so Coinbits is going to grow, like our product roadmap will grow and evolve with Bitcoin and Bitcoin's curve. And we're really excited. I mean, if you're talking 5 years out, we're already starting at projects looking that deep. And there are some very interesting technologies related to custody payments that we're currently experimenting with. So yeah, without getting too specific about the roadmap, it's a really cool time to be innovating in Bitcoin.
Frida, please. Dave, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in, and I'm sure this was already covered in some form or the other, but the one thing that is very refreshing about Coinbits is that currently we don't have any outside investor money. And if we ever had to take any outside investor money, we know that Maher and Yousef are very good in doing their background checks for years and years on people on a personal level and on a professional level. And so it is something that just really gives me confidence in the longevity of this company, because we kind of, see the scams blow up left and right around us, and we just kind of keep hold and low and steady, I guess is the word. And also, be truly in a Bitcoin fashion accountable, in our whole beings to what we deliver and what we bring into the world. And part of that is to not grow faster just because of money coming in, grow steady, and in the long run to really give a service to people that will live on hopefully for forever.
Yeah, that's exactly what Coinbits is. The cool thing about Coinbits, I think, is we have the history to prove it, right? We're 5 years in. You'd be hard pressed to find another altcoin first company, Bitcoin only company that has been only Bitcoin, has been around that long and has the track record to prove it. And, as Dave said, we're building towards a Bitcoin standard. These other companies in Bitcoin, they're great. And, we love all of them, allies. Our mission, so everyone knows, is bringing us closer and closer to the Bitcoin standard. That's what the team's working for every day. And as Dave alluded to, we're already thinking 5-10 years out, because that's where we see Bitcoin going. We see, fiat declining while Bitcoin accelerates, as we've seen the last 10 years, last 13 years. So with Coinbits, you just know that you're with Bitcoin only people who see a Bitcoinized world. With all that, I want to thank Maher and Yousef and the rest of the team for this. Was awesome to just, hear. We don't get to do this that often. We get to talk a lot personally and go off on our tangents as a team, but hearing everybody's thoughts, from a historical perspective to a present perspective to the future, amazing. And, discussing where Coinbits was and where we are now and where we're going, it is awesome for everyone to see. And, if anyone has any final remarks, open the floor before we close out here.
Hey, I can just help wrap up, at least on my end. I just want to say to the team, to Yousef, it's been an absolute honor building alongside you guys. I can't wait 5 years from now when we look back. We should probably like replay this, this spaces together and kind of laugh about it over a fire. But I absolutely love working with you guys, and every minute is incredibly inspiring. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to, to be your leader and to build Coinbits alongside you guys. It's incredibly humbling, and I won't let you down.
That's fantastic. And with that, guys, I think we'll wrap up here. You know where to find us, coinbits.app, and keep your eyes open for everything that we're doing going forward. We just released Coinbits 2.0, which we're really excited about. And I must say our users are really excited about, and it's easy to see why. And there's just so much more coming with Coinbits and with Bitcoin. And we can't wait to see you there. And we'll see you on the next space. Thanks again, everybody.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Bitcoin Roundup podcast presented by Coinbits. So what do you think of the conversation? Share your thoughts with us on Twitter @CoinbitsApp, and be sure to subscribe to be notified of our next episode release. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Bitcoin Roundup podcast.